This is The Storied Outdoors, a podcast somewhere between Lewis and Tolkien and Lewis and Clark, finding clarity in the stories we tell and the adventures that shape us. Welcome to The Storied Outdoors. My name is Brad Hill, and I'm joined as always by my good friend and pal, Brian Gill. We're so pumped today to connect with Pete Peterson. Pete is the author of the Revolutionary War adventure, The Fiddler's Gun, and its sequel, Fiddler's Green, as well as a variety of short stories. As a playwright, he's also published The Battle of Franklin, a stage adaptation of Frankenstein and the Hiding Place, which I hope we get to talk about some in our conversation today. He's done lots of things in his life. I was reading about this and I thought this was interesting. A U.S. Marine air traffic controller. That sounds stressful. Television editor, art teacher, boatwright, which I had to look up. I didn't know what a boatwright was, but now I do. A Florida sheriff's at the Florida Sheriff's Boys Ranch. And not too long ago, he spent several weeks on the pilgrimage called the Camino de Santiago. He and his wife, Jennifer, live in Nashville, where he is the executive director of the Rabbit Room and managing editor of the Rabbit Room Press. As I was prepping for this, Pete, I saw that Marine, the air traffic controller, and we had just recorded with Kenneth and Shay from Wolfbane Books. I don't know if you knew this or not, but Kenneth was an air traffic controller for the Navy and spent time on a naval aircraft carrier in the Persian Gulf. So I thought that was interesting.
Interesting. I need to talk to him, and we might have been on the same ship.
How about that?
It's like, I've never met an air traffic controller, and now I've met two. That's pretty cool.
I should clarify, I'm not technically an air traffic controller. I was what they call a air support operations operator. The difference being an air traffic controller uses radar to see where planes are, and I don't get that benefit. I had to convince pilots to tell me where they were and believe them, and learned in the process.
That sounds way more stressful.
Yeah, pilots do not tell you the truth. You get on the radio and you're like, "Hey, what's your position?" And I say, "Oh, I'm at such and such." And I look up and I'm like, "Actually, I see you, and you're right here." And he's like, "Oh yeah, I guess I am." I'm like, there are other planes in the area. Helpful for us to be honest here.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, man, this past November, I had the pleasure of sitting in on your session about the Camino de Santiago, or the Way of St. James. And it was such a rich conversation. And as we left, I could tell there seemed to be a lot left on the bone to sort of unpack and talk about. I can't imagine trying to compress the time that you spent on the Camino into a 1 hour conversation that not only was it compressed into a 1 hour conversation, but one that you shared with other folks who were a part of that. So I'd love for us to spend some time unpacking that. But Pete, thanks so much for taking time to join us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Pete, can you give us a brief refresher for those who may not be familiar with the Camino de Santiago? What is the Way of St. James, and what was the inspiration for you to take on that journey?
Yeah. Well, the inspiration, ours was the same as a lot of Americans, actually. Back in, I think it was 2011, 2012, Emilio Estevez wrote and directed a movie starring his dad, Martin Sheen, called The Way. And it's a small independent film, and it's really well done. And Jennifer and I saw that really early. We got married in 2011, and within the first year of our marriage, I think we saw that movie, and we're both really drawn to it and the way that it portrayed this pilgrimage. And the movie is about a man whose son goes to hike the Camino de Santiago, and I'll explain that in just a second. And his son dies on the first day, and so he goes to collect his ashes, and then decides to hike it himself and sprinkle his son's ashes along the whole pilgrimage way.
Oh, wow.
So that was the inspiration for us wanting to go. And we just kind of put a pin in it back then, saying one of these days. And so then a couple of years ago, my wife was just, she was trying to get into exercise habits and just couldn't develop anything that she enjoyed doing. And I told her one night, I said, I think you need a goal. So that exercise isn't just exercise for exercise sake, but like something that you're working toward. So think about it. And And so Monday morning she woke up and she said, I want to hike the Camino de Santiago. And I was like, wow, not what I had in mind, but okay, let's do it.
A little bit more
And
than a
later that,
couch to 5K
Yeah, I
there.
was thinking more of the local 5K.
yeah, exactly. But later that week, we bought our tickets. So to sum up what the Camino is a Spanish word that means the way. Kind of like the Mandalorian. This is the way. And in
Nice.
Spanish, you would say this is the Camino, which I kind of love. But it's a historic pilgrimage route of the church. So there are three primary pilgrimages of the church historically, and those are to Rome, to Jerusalem, and then the third is to Santiago. And Santiago is in Spanish means Saint James, Saint Iago. So that's where the word comes from. The Camino de Santiago is the path, the way to the city of St. James. And in Catholic tradition, Santiago is the resting place of the remains of St. James. Of course, you can question the historicity of that all you want, but whether you believe that his actual bones are there or not, for 1,000 years or more, the church has believed that they are. And people from all over the world have traveled there to kind of pay homage to one of the apostles. So whether it's historically accurate or not, it is still fraught with tradition and meaning. So even though I'm not a Catholic, and I would probably argue that that's probably not St. James, that did not affect my desire to really engage in the pilgrimage as a pilgrimage, if that makes sense. And so for the last 1,000 years, the church has, developed this kind of series of hostels and an entire economy that sort of follows this route across Europe. And then it all converges, or a lot of it converges in France, just across the border from Spain. And the last 500 miles of it run across Spain to Santiago. And so the whole way is kind of like dotted with pilgrimage hostels, which they call albergues. And they are just, a lot of people, when you say hostel, a lot of people have in their minds this kind of idea of dirty, hairy, smelly hitchhikers in Europe, all kind of living in a gross dorm. And it's not like that. Like these things, by and large, I mean, I'm sure that there are some bad spots you can end up that do kind of, fit that mold. But what our experience was, most of them are very small. A lot of them are places that are run by families. We stayed in a couple of houses that have been doing this for hundreds of years, just serving pilgrims. And their whole family history is associated with it. And so, you walk into these places and they serve you food. There are places where you show up and the monks wash your feet, just like back in Jesus' day. You've been walking all day and they want you to kick off your shoes so they can wash your feet as an act of service. So it was all marked by this sense of Christian hospitality. And not all of it's Christian. Some people are just, living on the route, making money, and that's fine. But it's hard to get away from the traditional aspect of it and seeing it in terms of this thing that the church has for 1,000 years valued as meaningful, and then seeing how people have kind of gathered along it to support the pilgrims, and then to spend, a lot of days walking in solitude and thinking about why was this so important that the church encouraged people to do it for 1,000 years. And, what you get out of that is kind of up to you, but I would argue that it's incredibly valuable. So that's the short. I don't know if you want me to get into everything right now, but that's kind of the short version of what we did. So the pilgrimage is a 500-mile walk across Spain.
Wow.
That's quite the exercise goal.
It is. And I will say that it sounds like, for instance, like when we were training for it, we did some stretches of the Appalachian Trail.
Yeah.
And I would not encourage a 60-year-old or a 70-year-old or an 80-year-old to go walk the Appalachian Trail. It is rough. You have to carry everything on your back, steep hills. It's living in the wild. It's hard. That is not the Camino de Santiago. I walked a ways with an 89-year-old. We walked a couple of days with a blind couple who were doing it for the second time.
Wow.
So it is very
Golly.
accessible. You will see people with wheelchairs.
Mhm.
There is the only thing preventing a person from doing this pilgrimage is the busyness of your own life. I would even argue that money shouldn't prevent you because it is not that expensive. It is shockingly affordable.
Wow.
We got a group that's going from Samford University, and they have a training plan called the Couch to Camino right now. And so
Yeah.
That's
That's good. If
amazing.
you go without training, you will regret it, but you'll still survive.
That's great.
The couch to Camino. Well, I hope they listen to this episode while they train. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, I'll be sure to pass this one along.
That's right. Man, there was so much covered in that presentation that was rich. You talked about several things that I wanted you to share a little bit about. You talked about carrying something with you from beginning to end. And now that there's also a lot more time now that even that has passed since that. And so what are some personal reflections back that you've had even since the presentation?
Yeah, it was an interesting experience. Well, I should first say that we had both done a lot of research going into it. And so it's almost impossible to do much research without coming across videos and books and blog articles and stuff and podcasts of people talking about how it's the most powerful, transcendental, sort of spiritual, emotional experience they've ever had.
Wow.
And I went into it being like, whatever. I'm not buying into that. I'm not.
Have you been to Hutchmoot? I mean,
yeah. But I didn't want, but mainly it's not that I was closed off to that possibility. I just didn't want to go expecting anything like that. I told people I'm taking 6 weeks off and I'm just going on a walk. And if that's all I get out of it, I am totally happy. And so skeptical person that I am, I didn't expect to have the religious sort of experience that a lot of people claim to. But I got to tell you, I mean, it moved me almost every day. It was the most profound thing I've ever done.
Wow.
In my life. It's still to this day is hard to describe it exactly. It's kind of like, I hope this is okay to say, but I heard Bruce Springsteen say one time that talking about songwriting is kind of like talking about sex. Like the minute you start talking about it, you've diminished it. It's just like it's something that you do. You're not supposed to talk about it. And I feel like it's kind of like this. It's such an all-encompassing physical, spiritual, emotional experience that it's really hard to sum up in words. And so a lot of times I'll just find myself saying, you know what, you just need to go do it. Yeah. Like that's the only way to understand.
I mean, you even got a tattoo, right? I mean, you got
I do. I've got a tattoo right there. All your podcast listeners can hear my tattoo right here.
There we go. Well, we'll have it on. We'll put the Zoom video actually on YouTube. So actually,
oh really? Oh, great. So people are looking at me. I better not pick my nose.
We have dozens of people.
Dozens of dozens.
Yeah, I did. So I got the tattoo in Santiago once we had completed the pilgrimage. So I think a couple of things that made it that experience for me were one, not having the expectation that it was going to change my life allowed me to be open to whatever happened in a way that I don't think I would have if I had gone into it thinking, okay, change me, But the things that were really meaningful for me had a lot to do with the church and the experience of the church. As an American, we went, just coming out of COVID and just coming out of, a lot of political stuff that had me really disillusioned with the way the church is being the church in our culture. Mm-hmm. And so just skeptical of everything and, feeling like, what is the church doing? Is this, really being led by the Holy Spirit? Mm-hmm. And so kind of going into this experience with those things in my mind, it was a wonderful way of experiencing the traditions and historicity of the church in a way that was so much bigger than the way I'm used to thinking about it. And like I've said a couple of times, this is something the church has believed, the capital C church has believed is a meaningful experience for followers of Christ for over 1,000 years. And there's got to be a reason for that. And I don't think it's anything as crass as money,
Yeah. Yeah. That doesn't last 1,000 years.
We actually went in a whole Right. Well, we went in a holy year, which technically means if you're Catholic, when you get to Santiago, if you walk through the correct door of the church, you get a plenary indulgence and can have your sins forgiven. And I just thought, wow, that's generous of them, given what I know of the gospel. And also, I thought, man, like, let's do some sinning so that we can get it all forgiven when we get there.
Let's rack them up. Should have come down here to could have come to Mobile for Mardi Gras and racked them on up.
Yeah, but all joking aside, like it was beautiful to see the way that the churches persisted over there across centuries. And I had this thought a few times that you end up walking through the ruins of a lot of churches, medieval churches that have fallen into ruins and are not there anymore, or sometimes they're in ruins, yet there is still a few monks staying there and they will welcome you in and feed you, that kind of thing. And I thought, like, several times, like, wouldn't it be beautiful if, the way, you walk through Europe, which is very much post-Christian at this point, and you see a lot of these churches that are falling into disrepair and they're seen in the past. And I thought, wouldn't it be beautiful if, the new creation that we're looking forward to as Christians, in addition to being, our bodily resurrection, was, is there a sense in which it's the resurrection of all creation? And what if the bones of these churches are also resurrected, and vivified in the new creation, and all of this is once again the center of worship and praise. And I thought how beautiful that would be, and why shouldn't that be true? I don't know if it is, but I hope that it is. So it was this beautiful experience of the church throughout history, just kind of stumbling into all these different. There were evangelical, examples of it. There were Catholic examples of it, Lutheran examples of it. Just everybody participating in this desire to just care for people who are walking. And, you walk into one of these places and nobody says, hey, have you given your life to Jesus? It's no, hey, here's a meal, which is, I think, just a much better understanding of Christianity than we're used to in our very sort of evangelical missions-driven mindset often. The first thing to do is to feed people and make them comfortable, give them what they need, and Christ will be in that ministry, whether you say his name or not. But beautifully, there are people out there doing real missions work in beautiful ways. One example is we stopped at this little place. I can't remember the town name. Just a wonderful little town, in the kind of hill country of, I guess it would be eastern Spain. And, they showed me to my room, which was on the top floor, and right outside the exterior door was the roof of this kind of like sandstone old, building that's been there for hundreds of years. And I just kind of sat there and ate my sandwich and drank my coffee and could look over the whole valley. And it was just beautiful. And these people were there just to take care of me, for $8. That's all it costs to stay there. And that includes a communal meal. So you go down in the evening and there's everybody that's staying there that night sits around the table and they bring you this home cooked food and they encourage conversation. And every night you're talking to people from many different languages and cultures and beliefs, all kind of open to this experience. And the church is setting the table for it. And so then after dinner,
beautiful.
Yeah, it's wonderful, wonderful. And then after dinner, they invited us to join what they called their Jesus meditation in, the stable. If anybody wanted to, everybody's welcome. It's not required. So my wife and I went and sat down, and it was in the stable, which was kind of lined with Oriental carpets, and everybody sat on the floor. And an old German woman, an old Dutch woman, which was important to me because I was in the process of rewriting my play about Corrie ten Boom's The Hiding Place at the time. Corrie was Dutch. So this old Dutch woman came in and sat down amongst us and said, hey, we're just going to read some scripture and meditate on it, and then we're going to share a little bit. And so she read a passage of scripture, kind of Lectio Divina style. Did I say that right? Lectio Divina, yeah. And it was interesting that the one that she chose was, come to me, all those who are weary and carrying heavy loads, was the way that she read it.
Yeah.
And I will give you rest. And so after walking 20 miles with a load on your back and then being given this hospitality, it was a really beautiful scripture. And she would just read it and then she would sit in it. And then she would read it again and then sit in it. And everybody, there were 20, 30 people in this stable, many of whom I know were not Christian, many of whom might have even been hostile to Christianity. They participated. They listened, you know.
Wow.
And then when she was done, she just said, you know, and now, you know, let's just go around the circle. And if you have anything that you want to share about why you're here or what you've experienced here on the Camino, just feel free to let us know. No pressure. And I think everybody in the circle shared something.
Wow.
And it was really beautiful. You know, like I said, people from all walks of life, coming from every different kind of background you can imagine, but all open to, you know, hearing what the way had to give them. And it was really emotional. People got really emotional in that kind of testimonial. But the thing that stood out to me the most was one of the gentlemen who helped run the hostel, the albergue. He shared his testimony, and he said that I think he was English, and he said, you know, 10 years ago or so, he became a Christian and read the Bible for the first time. And the thing that jumped out at him was the commission to go into all the world making disciples of all people. And he felt really called to do that and really helpless to do it. And he said that he prayed, Lord, like, I hear that this is what you want me to do, but I'm just a guy in England. I have no idea how to share this with the world. I don't know what to do. And he said, in whatever way, the Holy Spirit came to him and said, go to Spain and I'm going to bring the world to you. And so he listened to that, and he ended up at this little albergue in Spain, and every night he sets a table for people from all over the world, and, you know, Jesus is available to them. You know, at the very least, he is hospitable, and at the most, he is sharing the gospel. And it was beautiful. It wasn't pushy. It wasn't cheesy. I have such a antenna up for what feels inauthentic, you know, in Christian circles.
Yeah.
And man, it just didn't go up in these situations, which I think is what makes it so attractive to so many people. Yeah. And so that kind of thing happened over and over to us across 500 miles, you know, and it's just this opportunity as an American. Like, we're very self-sufficient, very self-confident, you know, I can do this myself, you know, that's our way. And even going into the Camino, that's how I felt. Like, doing all the research, I'm gonna have everything I need in my pack, and I've got all the information in my head. I'm not gonna need any help. And yet, there are days when everything goes wrong, and you don't know how you're going to get to where you need to go, or you can't get to where you need to go, or you get to where you need to go, and all the beds are full, and you've got to walk to the next town, you know, or you know, whatever problem it is. And there's a saying amongst pilgrims on the Camino that the Camino will provide. And we found that to be true. Like, something will work out. Somebody is going to take care of you. And the beautiful thing about that saying is what they're saying is the way will provide. And of course, Christ says, I am the way, right? And so there's like kind of layers of meaning built into it that don't occur to people if, you know, you haven't studied the Bible. But if you have and you believe, then it's just, there's this multi-layered experience of Christ to me. I almost came to think of it as if Christ had laid himself down physically across this landscape, and you are experiencing Christ over 500 miles every day in some physical embodied way. Like, you know, we talk about it often at you know, in our own churches as if, you know, oh, I've got a personal relationship with Jesus. And well, what does that mean? You know, it's just this kind of cerebral thing. And in an experience like the Camino, what it means is food. What it means is a bed, you know, and when you trust, you know, that the way is going to provide this thing from you. And in my understanding, that way is Christ. And I think that's the metaphor that's operating across the whole thing. You're in a very physical way, relying on the provision of Christ to give you what you need in a way that Americans just don't do.
We don't get it. Yeah.
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 Man,
and it is, yeah.
I was just going to say, and going back to the way, I mean, wasn't that what the early Christians were called? People of the way.
Hmm.
And it
Yeah,
was
there's
just
a lot of layers to it. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, one of the things that you didn't you hinted at and you talked about a little bit, but it felt like there was more to say was you guys, you're on this trek and you don't carry a lot, not like
Hmm.
you're on the Appalachian Trail, right?
Yeah.
You don't carry as much with you as you would on a hike on the AT, but it forced you to rely on the kindness of others. And you're talking about that now.
Yeah.
But in specific, like in what way learning to receive hospitality?
Yeah.
Did it teach you that? Do you feel like you're better at that now than you were before?
I do. It was a learning experience. I think it would be interesting to hear from people from other cultures, whether it's the same kind of struggle. But for Americans who, like I said, are so self-sufficient, like it's hard for us to admit that we need, the old
Mhm.
lady up around the bend.
Mm.
Um, but there are moments, where, you finish climbing a mountain and you're just exhausted and you're looking at your map and you can see that there's not a town for another 5 kilometers and your feet hurt and you're just done. And then you crest that mountain and you discover that there is a little shack that somebody's built there. And there's an entire table spread with fresh fruit and water and snacks and, whatever refreshment. And, there's a sign that says, it's all free. Put a donation in the bucket if you
Mhm.
want, and it's just like you didn't expect that. And here you are. And you just get overwhelmed with gratitude for those little moments.
Yes.
And you want to thank somebody, and you go to find somebody to thank and you do. But it's bigger than that at the same time. Like it's teaching you something about how, it's okay. You don't need a full day's food in your pack. So we're going to take care of you, you know?
Mm.
There's a spiritual lesson there in addition to a physical lesson. So it's like, I've also described the Camino as a physical parable, meaning that like it's telling you all sorts of spiritual truth in a very physical way. Like you
Mm.
walk through the parable and you learn it in your body in a way that we often have trouble learning it when we just read a metaphor on a page. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, it
Yeah.
even makes me think of a lot of the scriptures and how active they are. As I walk through the valley, he makes me lie
Mhm.
down. There's a lot of physicality in experiencing God and in the outdoors. And it seems very similar to what you're talking about.
Yeah, very much. It's very easy to read the scriptures after having gone through an experience like that and understanding them in a much more physical, immediate way,
Mhm.
because, this is how, for 99% of all human history, people commuted from place to place.
Mm.
Oh,
You
yeah.
walked and you relied on the hospitality of strangers.
Mm.
Yeah, that's so good. Why? I guess the other thing that made me think about as we were talking was like you guys grew up in Florida, and we live in Alabama, and there's the Southern hospitality thing. I think we're so used to like trying to give out hospitality that we have a hard time receiving it. We're more concerned about like trying to take care of other people and ourselves that we don't really receive it well. I guess why is it so hard for us, do you think, to receive hospitality?
Um, I don't know, but I do feel like it's an American thing.
Mm.
Um, it's just like or at least me, like I am so independent. Like it's really important to me not to have to rely on anybody else. And I don't say that as a virtue, at least not
Mhm.
anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just the way that
Mm.
we're taught to think. It's for our own pursuit of happiness. We have our own yard, our own self-sufficient house where we don't have to see our neighbors. With the fence around the back, and like everything is self-sufficient.
Yeah.
And I'm not convinced that that's healthy.
Mm.
You know,
There's a lot
so I
of
think
pride, I guess.
yeah. So we're bred in that, and when we enter a place where we don't speak the language and we don't have the food we need and we don't know the way to the next town, all these things, and you walk into a house and somebody says, "Hey, I'm going to take care of you. In fact, I've got you this food, I've got you this drink. If you want a bed."
And
It's
let me
just
wash
kind
your
of,
feet.
then let me wash your
Mm.
feet sometimes. Yeah, it's
Wow.
just overwhelming. And you have to learn to just say thank you,
Yeah.
and be grateful for it and realize that you didn't do anything to deserve this other than hand over your $10. You know, it's pretty remarkable. Yeah. In fact, like to the money thing, there's the sort of economy that's built up along the Camino is such that they intentionally make things affordable. So that most restaurants that you go into will have a pilgrim's menu that you can ask for, which will be different prices, where you can get a 3-4 course meal for, $7, $8, including free wine. But
It's the
you have
dollar
to be a
menu,
pilgrim.
the European dollar menu.
It is, except that it's the good stuff.
The
It's
good
the good
stuff.
stuff, not the cheap
Right?
crap.
Which is, again, it's like that's another parable,
Yeah.
like the thing that the pilgrim gets is not the scraps. The pilgrim gets the good stuff.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that's so good. I mean, on so many levels. I mean, gosh, we could riff off that for an hour, just talking about what the good stuff is that the pilgrim is receiving beyond lodging, beyond the food, beyond the hospitality. Right. Man,
it's pretty wonderful.
What was the thing that you carried, Pete?
Yeah. So the bigger story there is, I told you this kind of synopsis of the movie, The Way.
Yeah.
About the guy that's sprinkling the ashes. Well, my priest, Thomas McKenzie, was a good friend of mine, long time, great friends. And he had been planning to go hike the Camino for a couple of years. And we had been planning it in tandem. We weren't going at the same time, but, we'd compare notes, like what kind of pack are you getting? What kind of shoes are you getting? That kind of stuff. And so it was a real sort of fun thing to be doing together. And he was going about 6 months before we were supposed to leave. And I just couldn't wait for him to go because I knew he'd love it. And then I couldn't wait for him to get back so I could pick his brain. Like, okay, what'd you learn? What should I do? What should I not do? What are the good ideas? What are the bad ideas? Well, he got in a car wreck 2 days before he left and died, he and his daughter. Yeah. And that was really hard on me. Like I said, he's a really close friend. And it hit me like a ton of bricks. And his wife gave me and my wife Thomas's pack that he had already packed for the Camino. It had everything in it. And so, my initial thought was, so I'm getting out of order. So there's this thing on the Camino called the Cruz de Ferro, which means the Iron Cross.
Yeah,
Cruz de Ferro. And historically, or I don't think it goes back 1,000 years. I think it's maybe 100, 150 years old. It's this iron cross that's erected on a mountaintop about 3/4 of your way to Santiago. And so traditionally what people do is you carry something from home, like a rock. You carry something from home that's supposed to be representative of some burden. And when you get to the Cruz de Ferro, you throw it at the foot of the cross and you leave it there. And so, obviously that's a powerful metaphor, sounds like Pilgrim's Progress. And, you can imagine how that preaches. And so knowing Thomas and how thoughtful he was, I thought in his pack here somewhere is what he was going to carry, and I'm going to carry it for him. So I went through the pack looking. I didn't find anything. So I don't know what he had in mind, but what I did find was his scallop shell. The scallop shell is the symbol of the Camino, and pilgrims wear a shell on their pack. So I took Thomas's shell with me and I carried it, for 500 miles in my pack. And, to me, it was symbolic of grief in a lot of ways. It was a hard season. After he died, we took care of his wife and his surviving daughter for a long, and still are. It's just been a long grieving process. And so carried that to the Cruz de Ferro and hung it on the beam of the cross when I got there.
I love it.
And, had our own little prayer. And it was a powerful moment. Really powerful. And the thing that I love about telling this story is the scallop shell is, in modern days is the symbol of the pilgrim. You carry it with you as you walk. But historically, you didn't carry it with you. The pilgrim would walk to Santiago and then continue to the coast and find a scallop shell on the coast and then bring it back with them as proof that they'd been to the holy city. So it was the proof that they had done it. And so, like, symbolically for me, hanging that shell there was, in my mind, proof that Thomas had made it to the holy city.
He's there, man.
Yeah.
He's there.
Gosh, man.
I still get choked up about it.
I didn't know I was going to cry today. Jeez, I'm sitting over here with these allergies. I think my neighbors. Ooh, wow.
Yeah. So I actually carried my own shell too. And
Gosh.
when we got to the coast, I threw my shell into the ocean and then went and found another one, a fresh one on the beach, and brought it home with me.
That's so special.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I had seen that. I did not know that you all were close friends, but I had seen that tragedy. And I mean, it just seems like the whole Nashville area and surrounding was just completely broken. And
yeah,
man, a lot of prayers.
He affected a lot of people.
Yeah,
yeah.
Special person.
Yeah, what was interesting about it was, we all knew and loved him, but after he died, people just came out of the woodwork, talking about things that he was doing and people that he was helping and caring for that nobody else had any idea about. He was just quietly serving more people than we could have imagined.
Yeah.
And so the ripple effects of, him being gone were far and wide.
Yeah. Well, I certainly enjoyed, the times that he would share on, Rabbit Room Post or what have you.
Yeah. He was a unique guy. There's nobody else like him.
Yeah. But he did the 1 minute review. When he do the 1 minute review,
yeah,
always
1 minute movie reviews.
Yeah, they were great. They were always helpful for me. So
yeah,
man, that's what a powerful and very visceral metaphor.
Yeah.
I'm sure it changes.
Yes.
Like you said, I like something you said earlier. It made me think about people that I've met. I've never gone to the Holy Land, to see, any of the places from the Bible, but people say it changes the way they read scripture.
Yeah.
When they stand on the Sea of Galilee and they breathe in that air and they hear those sounds and feel the stones beneath their feet. And I think, for you, as you read any scripture that talks about all these metaphors that you've mentioned, like they hit a whole lot different now than they used to. Right.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah. It's funny too, that, just historically, the Camino is strewn with folklore and traditional tales, which run the gamut from really cool to really hysterically weird. And so, like, for instance, there was one, I can't remember the name of the town, but there was one place we stopped that was it was like the Church of the Dancing Chicken. And we're like, what is this all about? And the whole town, there was a festival there about the whole dancing chicken, no, it was called The Chicken Who Stood Up and Danced. And and we were like, what is this? And did a little research and found out that, I don't know how long ago, probably, medieval time period, there was like a barmaid who had fallen in love with this pilgrim who was coming through, only he rebuffed her. And so in spite, she put like the inn's silver into his pack and then called the police on him. And the police hung him. And then she felt terrible about it. And so I'm abbreviating the story, but what happened was that his parents were incensed by this, of course, and went to like the local magistrate and said, this is not fair. You've got to save our son or something. And the magistrate said something to the effect of, it's too late. That boy is as dead as the chicken on my plate, as he was eating his fried chicken. And at that moment, the chicken stood up and danced. And then they went to the gallows and found that the boy was still alive. And it was a miracle.
How about
a miracle?
Yeah. And so the church has this little alcove with a chicken in it that is claimed to be a descendant of the chicken who stood up and danced.
The chicken danced.
So there's those little pieces of, kind of church folklore that are super fun. And then it got even more interesting as we got closer to the coast. There are folkloric beliefs that Jesus visited Spain during his lost years. And of course, there's no, historical evidence for any of this, but who knows? They can believe it if they want. But they think that, they know there's a certain area where Jesus came ashore and kind of spent time with the Druids. And there's all these accounts of the things that Jesus did there in Western Spain. But then I like to think that, who knows if any of that's true? And I don't think it is. But I like to think that Jesus did that and then he went back And at some point he said, "Hey, James, like, once I'm gone, there's these druids you got to go meet." Because we do know that James went to Spain and founded the church in Spain.
Wow.
And it's just a really fun idea to think that Jesus had made some druid friends and sent James off to see them.
Yeah, he prepared.
But yeah, who knows? But
Who knows?
It's really fun to read that kind of stuff that is so embedded in the local traditions.
Yeah.
But I've never heard of any of that, you know. And there's also like there are werewolves and just really and giants and all these kind of things that are associated with the whole path that you end up walking. So we had a little book full of all the folkloric tales, so that every night wherever you stopped, you could read, you know, the crazy little tale that they keep alive there, which was fun.
That's amazing.
Man, I love that. I mean, and it kind of ties in perfectly with this next segment of what we're want to talk about on the podcast. We're going to shift gears just a little bit. So many of our listeners are familiar with the Rabbit Room because we've talked about Hutchmoot. We talked about you guys. We've had several Rabbit Room friends on our podcast. You're the executive director and the managing editor of the Rabbit Room Press. And so that your whole life is kind of centered around storytelling, you know, in one form or another, writing and playwright and all these things. What is it about storytelling that draws you to it?
I don't think we understand anything about ourselves or the world without putting it in terms of a story. I mean, and I think, I think Jesus was the best example of that. You know, he told stories to get his points across. The Bible is, if nothing, I don't think the Bible is anything more important maybe than a story, as opposed to a collected set of facts or a collective set of sayings or teachings. Like, things have to be put into the context of a story for us as humans to really understand why they matter. And so I think it works on us at every possible level, if that makes sense. So, you know, telling stories is just kind of baked into our being. And I just happen to love them because I think, you know, as a child, my dad was a preacher, and, you know, big part of preaching is storytelling. If you're a good preacher, that's not fair. There are good preachers who are not storytellers, but, you know, my dad was, and he was a good one. And I can remember, you know, being a 10-year-old boy sitting in the pew and just being bored to tears with theology and Bible verses. But as soon as Dad started telling a story to tie things together, like, my ears perked up and I was paying attention, you know, and that was how the things found their way into my heart.
I think good preachers that aren't storytellers are like dancing chickens. They're pretty hard to find.
yeah, and miraculous.
Oh, man.
And maybe non-existent. Yeah.
Maybe.
I think maybe, possibly. Oh, man. Is that so for you, is that your love for writing and storytelling for yourself? Is that something that was an inspiration from you, coming from him? What is
I don't really know how to locate. I don't really know how to locate why it's there. You know, I've always just loved books, loved stories, loved movies. You know, wanted to make movies for a long time. And it's just what I love doing. It's the way that I think about everything. Like, I you know, my wife is fond of saying, like, I don't have any stories, she'll say. And I'm like, what are you talking about? You have a whole life. And she's like, yeah, but I don't have stories. I'm like, that's not true. You're just not thinking about things as a story. And, you know, then she'll get around to relating an anecdote. And I'm like, man, right there, that's a story. Only you're not storing it in your mind like you should. And she thinks that's funny because every day, everything is happening to me, I'm immediately storyizing it. Right. So, like, you know, if I leave this interview and go get in a car wreck, like, before I've even gotten to the hospital, I'm replaying it in my mind and trying to figure out, how do I tell this as an effective story, so that, you know, when I tell somebody about it, I can make it entertaining and interesting rather than just a list of facts. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
I love that. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And so, you know, a lot of people laugh at me because they say, like, you know, Pete has just got more stories than anybody I've ever met. And I don't think that's true. I think I've just kind of practiced filing things away in a way that I can recount them. And not everybody does that, you know, because we've all got the same amount of life behind us by the time we reach 50, you know, so there's no reason it shouldn't be full of stories, in my opinion.
Yeah. They're there. We're just not telling them.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that action of practicing and rehearsing in your mind. Like,
Yeah.
how do I process this as story? And
Yeah.
that's a
Well,
really an exercise in what we're trying to cultivate through this podcast as a podcast somewhere between Lewis and Tolkien and Lewis and Clark, finding
I love
clarity in the
that.
stories we tell and the
Yeah.
adventures that shape us. So all these things are shaping us and changing us and working
Yeah.
on us, just like your time on the Camino. That's a part of your story, and like you're learning how to tell it. I mean, looking back, there has to be like writing inspiration that comes from the folklore stories that you were talking about in your own
Sure.
experiences. That will impact your writing from now on. I would imagine things will come to
Yeah.
mind as you're writing in the future.
Yeah. Two things. One is, I think hope is a natural product of storytelling. I think hope is a very difficult thing to get your head around unless you understand the arc of a story, that things are in motion, moving towards something else.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so, like developing a sense or practicing the verb of hoping, I think is an exercise in storytelling. Like we're telling ourselves a story about where this is all going, or not going. So I think it's important in that aspect.
My kids are trying to learn that. They're 6 and 8 years old. And so when they see a movie that's got a little bit of conflict, they're like, I don't like this. I was like, and I have to keep telling them, just hang on, keep watching. It gets better. You gotta watch the ending.
Right. Yeah, that's totally true. And it's like, as a writer and a storyteller, like the more you participate in that art, the more you're able to appreciate how it's tinkered with. So I can watch a really dark movie that is maybe can be described as hopeless and understand the hope that it's implying in its negative. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So something like Breaking Bad, which is a TV series that I have loved, and it's very bleak and dark. But like as a storyteller, like I recognize that the reason this is powerful storytelling is because it's illustrating the reverse of hope. Does that make sense? And that's important to me because that helps me better understand what it's acting against. So and that's when you get into mature viewing and reading and all that kind of stuff, because kids are not prepared for that. But as we mature, we should be able to engage those sort of ideas in more complex ways that aren't as simple as conflict resolution.
Yeah, I was given a talk just this past week about having an attitude of gratitude and how to be hopeful even when things aren't going well. And somebody asked me, said, what is a book that you could recommend? And I literally, the only thing I could think of was Hemingway's Old Man and the Sea. And I said,
Yeah.
If you read that as someone having hope, that book will transform the way you look at hope. And it's just the beauty of this optimism and just pressing forward and leaning into hope that that story it exemplifies that.
Yeah, that's a great example. The thing that jumped into my mind was Corey ten Boom's The Hiding Place.
Well, tell us about that. You've spent a little time with that.
I have. Just the backstory is, I think back in 2017, maybe, I was commissioned to adapt it for the stage. And the funny thing about that is, the director of the theater down in Houston, that their theater company had been founded by the woman who played Corey ten Boom in the film back in the 70s.
Whoa.
Wow.
Yeah, and then she had passed away, and they had just built this brand new, like, world-class theater called the George Theater, named after Jeanette Cliff George in her honor. And so it's kind of a way of christening that theater. They wanted to commission a new adaptation of The Hiding Place.
Wow.
So I had some connections to them and worked with some of those folks before. So they asked me if I was interested. And I said, well, let me go read the book and see if I like it. Because when they asked me, I had heard Corey ten Boom's name before, but I literally thought she was a Native American. Just because ten Boom sounds like a Native American name. And I no idea who she was. I just knew that people loved her. And so I didn't know it was about the Holocaust. I didn't know it was this, profoundly Christian story. So I went that weekend and read the book and called them back, and it's like, whoa, hey, yeah, let me tackle this. I'd love to.
I'm in.
Yeah, yeah, I'm in. But I had a caveat. Like, the book, I felt like, was very clearly written in hindsight. So Corey was hid Jews during in the Netherlands during World War II, and then they were captured and sent to a concentration camp.
Mm.
And she lost almost all her family. And so then, she survived and went on to testify, about Jesus and the Holocaust for years afterward, and became beloved as a teacher and preacher and, witness. And then, wrote this book. And what struck me about the book was it felt like it was written with her always knowing how it was all going to end up,
Mm-hmm.
And so the result is, you had scenes in which she and her sister are in a concentration camp, which is, one of the most horrific settings you can imagine. People dying, being murdered, all this kind of stuff. And the way that it's written is they're just kind of like, man, we should just be grateful to Jesus because he went through all this too.
Mm.
And they felt in the book, they feel a little happy-go-lucky in a way that was shocking to me. And I had trouble understanding, especially her sister, Betsy, who I would argue is a saint of the first order. She was something otherworldly in the way that she understood Jesus. To be able to, in the midst of a concentration camp, look at everything that's going on and have pity for the guards, in addition to the prisoners, because she says, think if they can be taught to hate like this, think how they can be taught to love. And so that was her mission. That's not a normal response to being in a concentration camp. So I felt like the thing that I wanted to tackle in my adaptation was just getting to the root of how do you as a person end up at that place, and can it possibly be that simple? So I really wanted to write it without the benefit of hindsight, if that makes sense, and treat it as if the characters were there in the middle of it, trying to figure out, what do we think about all this suffering and death?
That brings a little bit more tension the way that you did it.
Brings a lot more tension, and I just think it's a more relatable way of understanding it. So, if Corey and Betsy ten Boom were in the middle of this environment, really having these immediate reactions of gratitude and grace, that is beautiful and miraculous and worthy of praise. But it's also very difficult for us who haven't been there and experienced that to understand. And I felt like I wanted to find a way to make it a story that I could enter into and believe and come to the same conclusion. So I told people sometimes that in the process that I kind of saw it as a superhero movie, an origin story. Like, I didn't want to write it as if Superman was Superman from frame one. I wanted to write it in such a way that when we got to the end of the story, Corey had become this incredible person that we know her to be. And we had seen how she had developed into that person. And so it was a lot of fun to work on. It was also terrifying because I knew how beloved the book was. I knew how fervently people loved it and read it and reread it and knew it inside and out. And I also knew that I was writing about the Holocaust, which is terrifying because, if you do that wrong, you're never going to be forgiven. And, there was also the sense in which it's a very Christian story, but by placing this very Christian story in the context of the Holocaust, I didn't want to be seen as sort of trying to co-opt Jewish suffering for evangelism, if that makes sense. So it's really important to me to figure out how to do this delicately and truthfully.
Man, walking on a glass floor, man.
It was. And then in addition to that, like, just the nature of adaptation is just because something makes a great book doesn't mean it makes a great play. You've got to take the material and figure out what is the best form of this in this medium. And theater is a very different medium than cinema or novelization. So that was complicated. So I knew immediately that it was not going to read just like the book. I needed to shake things up. And then, also my wife and I went to Amsterdam to visit Corey's house, to stand in the hiding place, to talk. And then we visited the concentration camp in Germany. And that was, if the Camino was the most profound spiritual experience in a good way, I would say that visiting a concentration camp was the most profound thing I've ever done in a negative way.
I can imagine. I can only
It's
imagine.
I've often said that it's kind of like the reverse of going to the Grand Canyon. Have you guys been to the Grand Canyon?
Yeah, I have. Yes.
So if you've been, you've had this experience of, you've seen pictures of it all your life. You've seen it in movies. You've read about it. But then when you go, you walk up to the rim and you're like, oh my gosh, it's so much bigger than anything ever communicated to me. Like your mind can't encompass the largeness of it. And it's just awe-inspiring. And going to a concentration camp was the opposite of that. And what I mean was, for example, we got to the end of the tour and there was a book, like a phone book on a sort of pedestal, the thin paper and the really tiny, people don't even know what phone books are anymore. For you youngsters, we used to have phone books and a really thin paper, really thick book with really small writing. And you open the book and at every entry is a person's name, the date they were interred in the camp, and the day they died in the camp.
Wow.
And it's just this thick book of thousands and thousands and thousands of names just for that camp. And then you walk into the next room and there's this huge map with a dot for every concentration camp. And there are hundreds of them, and every one of them has a book like that. And like, you can't get your mind around just how big and how dark and evil all of it was. Because in addition to just dying, there was creativity involved. Like, there are architectural plans, and there was this vast sense of like, how can we do this more efficiently?
Yep.
And people would come in and study how do we kill these people in a better way? And that's a level of evil that's hard to get your head around.
Right.
It wasn't just, oh, we didn't realize what we were doing. It's like, no, we realized it and we tried to do it better. So that experience for me was incredibly powerful. And I couldn't have written a play without it, I don't think. But it kind of like, the central part of that experience was standing in front of the crematorium oven where, and spoilers here, but the crematorium oven where Betsy ten Boom, passed out of the world bodily. And that, in the context of the research and the story and living with those characters was just awful. And my wife and I just went and sat in the car and cried. It was just deeply, deeply dark. And in a way, I encourage anybody to go experience it because it really expands your sense of empathy in, a wealth of ways. So coming back from that, sitting down to write, I felt like at that point I had a commission and a calling and knew what direction to send it in. And it was interesting. So much of the play is about the light that is dark, deeper than all darkness. So that was one of the things that Corey would say is that, Jesus' love is deeper than any darkness.
Yes.
And so in the context of the play, we wrote a lot about light. And then, when you get into the concentration camp, it's so dark, hearing them talk about the light that is deeper than all darkness. And so then the transformative moment of the play for me is when her body is actually put into the oven, which happens on stage. The oven is opened, and instead of the fire of suffering and hell that we associate that instrument with, the thing that actually comes out of it is a beautiful, brilliant light. Meaning that there is a light behind that darkness, right? And trying to do, in some sense, the same thing that Christianity has done with the cross, which prior to Christianity was just the instrument of cruelty and evil. And that symbol has been redeemed to mean something else. And so we were trying in the play to do a similar thing with that oven and demonstrate that Betsy's passage in that was not into darkness, but was into light, because there's somebody that had gone there before. So anyway, it was a really powerful experience, did well in Houston. And then during COVID, before COVID hit, I wanted to bring it to Nashville. And then COVID shut down theater across the country, across the world. And so I spent a couple of years really rethinking the show. I had this sneaking feeling that its Houston iteration had not achieved its full potential. So working with a director that I have a great relationship with here in Nashville, we reimagined some things and rewrote the show in large part, and then premiered it this past summer of 2022 here in Nashville. and did really well. And one of the most exciting things about that was we took the time to film it.
Yeah,
That's
that
what I
was
wanted
was
to
gonna
talk about.
Yeah, because you even earlier you said how different it is, in play form versus book form versus film. But
Yeah.
now you've brought those things together,
Which
is
is
fascinating.
complicated.
Yeah,
Man, when
But yes,
you showed the preview at Hutchmoot,
I
and
I
got
did.
chill bumps, man.
I looked at
Well, that's
Brad,
good.
and there were tears in my eyes, and I said,
That's awesome.
"Bro, we got to get Pete on the podcast." That was like the moment I was like, "We've got to talk about this film adaptation." I mean, it was so powerful, and that was just a trailer.
Yeah, thanks. Well, there's some filmmakers here in town, Laura and Tony Matula, who are largely involved in the theater community, and they do lots of music videos and all other things. And over the past couple of years, we had worked with them a couple of times. We shot a Wendell Berry short film for Hutchmoot Homebound in 2020 called Sonata at Payne Hollow. And that was our first attempt to sort of think, hey, so this is a piece of stage writing, but can we film it in a way that's cinematic and make it more than just filmed theater? And it's just kind of like a hybrid art form, because I think we've all seen like the masterpiece theater kind of versions of Shakespeare, which just end up kind of dry and not super interesting because they're just a presentation of theater. And so we wanted to think, okay, is there a better way to do that? A way to approach it with a cinematic eye that's not full on cinema where we're recreating reality, but it's still theater filmed in a cinematic way. And so we had a good time doing that, and I thought we were successful in doing that with the Sonata at Payne Hollow. And then the following year at Hutchmoot Homebound, and I should probably say Homebound was our online version of the conference during COVID.
Right.
We did a similar thing with an excerpt of a play a musical I've been working on called Linden Fair. And we brought them in to film that. And that went really well. So we had some, kind of proof of concepts along the way. So when we did The Hiding Place, we just thought, you know what? Can we do this at feature length? And we just took the dive and we did it. And, we've almost got a final cut of the movie now. And I'm really thrilled with how it's turned out. I think it's going to be a powerful experience for folks.
When is that supposed to air?
So our this is not public knowledge yet. We haven't really released the release dates yet, but it'll be in August.
Okay.
Sometime this August. And it'll be it'll be released through Trafalgar, which is sort of like Fathom events, it'll be a 1-2 night only kind of thing. And then if it does well, then we'll do some extensions, hopefully.
Wow, that's exciting.
But that was exciting. And, it was a great creative experience and allowed us, I think, to capture the best version of that play on screen. One of the things in working with theater, one of my frustrations has always been that like theater is so much fun and it's so much work. And, 30, 40 people put in just night and day work for weeks to provide this experience to audiences. And then when the curtain goes down on the closing performance, it just all evaporates into thin air.
Yeah.
You got nothing to show for it except for a few pictures and some word of mouth, hopefully. And I hated that. And so, in trying to think like, how do we come up with a sustainable theater model? We thought like, well, if we can close the stage show, but then still have an artifact that people can engage with, then hopefully that's something that will monetize and can feed finances back into the theater program to help the next show get off the ground.
That's good.
So it's partly a creative thing, and it's partly a financial thing. And so far, we're seeing that I think is going to work, because the idea would be that, whenever we do an original production, we want to come up with this cinematic way of filming it so that audiences beyond Nashville can experience it. And then hopefully it'll make money to be able to continue the film program or the theater program.
That's cool.
That's kind of the direction we're heading in. And we're doing the same thing with audiobooks. I did an adaptation of Frankenstein for the 200th anniversary of its publication a few years ago. And we did the stage show. It was very successful. And as soon as that closed, we got the whole cast into the studio to do an audio version of it. And I kind of rewrote, all the stage directions in kind of like radio voice, so that you've got the person saying, the monster walks into the room and picks up the table and flings it at Victor, that kind of dramatic stuff. And so we had the whole cast re-record it, and that was nominated for, some awards and stuff. And it was we all thought it was a really engaging way to experience the play. And again, it provided this artifact that persists beyond closing night, to hopefully help, the whole theater program persist. So we're trying to figure out, do we want to do that with a hiding place? I don't know if we do or not, just because I'm trying to imagine how that and the film interact. Because if we're going to sell the film to streaming, does it make sense that you can still buy it as an audiobook? I just don't know. But we're playing with those ideas.
Those are cool.
Which I think most people don't do in the context of theater.
Love that.
So my daughter just finished. She's been in a couple of plays, but this time she helped the stage manager. So she was helping, pull the curtains and set changes and so forth. And so they just had their last shows on Sunday afternoon. And so there was that feeling like you talked about of, it's done and it's over. But it's been a great experience for her.
It's so much fun.
Yeah.
The thing I love most about theater. Yeah. The thing I love most about it is, like, I started out as a writer, a novelist, which I love. But, when you're a novelist, you are sort of the final arbiter of the reader's experience. Like, I control every single word that the reader reads. And I enjoy that, and that's fun, but it's very solitary. And then with theater, I discovered really quickly that even though I've written the script, that's just the beginning. Then you have, the set designer and the director and the lighting director and the composer and all these other people that are bringing their individual art forms to bear on the skeleton that you've given them. And the result is just this enormously collaborative thing that is so much better than you could have done on your own. And the process of it even is, you'll take your script and you sit in a room with all the actors and you read it. And then you all discuss, like, hey, what worked, what didn't? And then I'll go home that night and rewrite things. Come back in the next day and we'll do it again. So it's this constant collaborative process of trying to get at what is the best possible version of this. And then once you've arrived at it, then you set everybody else loose on their particular art form and doing the best thing they can do. And so what an audience sees on opening night is just the product of so much individual creativity that nobody can claim, responsibility for it entirely, which is really refreshing to me, because it's always been uncomfortable for me. Like, if somebody comes up to me and says, hey, I read your books, and they're the best things I ever read. I love it so much. Thank you. Thank you. And I get really bashful. I'm like, okay, thanks. They're not the best books in the world, but thank you for saying that. It's just awkward. I'm not comfortable with it. But in theater, like, if somebody comes and says, hey, I saw The Hiding Place, it just moved me to tears. Best thing I've ever seen. I'm like, oh man, didn't they do a great job? Like, I have all these other people to point at, because it's not just me anymore. Yes. And I love that.
Well, even the audience takes place in the not the creation of it, but the experience of it. The audience is just as much a character.
Yeah, I've said that the audience is the final cast member. And a great example of that is like with The Hiding Place. There's a scene early on in the show when the whole family is sitting around the table for breakfast. And, in my mind, this is where we're establishing all the characters and their interrelationships. And it's a really fun conversation with lots of jokes and back and forth banter and stuff. But what we found is in rehearsal, all the actors are aware that we're doing a Holocaust play. So everybody's approaching things very seriously. And they go through the lines and stuff. And I keep saying, hey, don't you realize that's a joke? Like, you got to deliver that like a joke. And they weren't getting it. They just weren't getting it. And I was just kind of like stressed out, like, what is going to happen here? And that went on. And I just had to put up with it until opening night. And a line came out of somebody's mouth and the audience laughed. And immediately they were like, the actors were like, oh, we get it now.
Now we get it.
They can't see what they're doing, right? But they required the participation of the audience to inform what's going on in stage. And then that entire scene just became delightful every night as they began to understand, oh, this is where I lean into the joke, and this is where I pause for dramatic effect, all that kind of stuff, which is really hard to hear and understand when you're just performing it in rehearsal.
Dry. Yeah.
Yeah.
Pete, one of the questions that we love to ask, we often will refer to the podcast as a digital campfire. So you said earlier, people say Pete has all kinds of stories. He has more stories than anybody we know. do you have a like a sort of a compressed, good little campfire story that's your favorite campfire story to tell? And that would you share that with us?
Okay, so here's a funny story about that, which is just the prelude to whatever the answer is.
Awesome.
But you sent me that question earlier to think about.
Yeah.
And I wasn't sure, and I was sitting in the room with my staff, and I said, "Hey, what story should I tell to the staff?" And they throw out all these stories, and I kept saying, "No, I can't tell that one. Nope, I can't tell that one. Nope, I can't tell that one."
Not for public consumption.
Yeah, so I'm not sure what the answer is. Gosh, let me think about it. I feel like it'd be good to, I will say that I do not have like one that I always like to tell. I've got a whole library of them in my mind that I can pull out. So like pulling the best one is always like a good question.
Was there something well, I'll help you narrow it down. Was there anything really funny that happened? I mean, you're on the Camino for, weeks. Was there like a particular funny thing that you guys look back on and really laugh at still?
Here is a funny one. Okay. So I got this journal here that somebody gave my wife before we left, and she kept meticulous notes of what we did every day. But one of the ideas that we had when we left was we wanted to write a song that we would sing along the way, kind of like, what is that song? There's a hole in the bottom of the sea. There's a hole in the bottom of the sea. There's a hole. There's a hole. There's a hole. There's a hole. There's a hole in the bottom of the sea. There's a frog in the hole in the bottom of the sea. You know what I'm talking?
Yep.
So we wanted to say, okay, so every day we will add something to the song for our entire walk. And so she recorded that, and I haven't sung this in so long, but I pulled it out because I thought it might come up. So I'm not going to sing you the whole thing because everybody would shoot themselves. It would because me singing is not any fun to listen to, and because it's just really long. But just as an example, every day we would walk and we would look for the thing that we would add to the song. So it would usually be something that was humorous or something that was like alliterative and just had the right syllable count or whatever. So a little bit of that is, and it started with the beginning of the song is, there's a whole lot of pilgrims on the road. There's a whole lot of pilgrims on the road. There's a whole lot of pilgrims. There's a whole lot of pilgrims. There's a whole lot of pilgrims on the road. So then day one was, there's a slug on the fence and a whole lot of pilgrims on the road. You with me so far?
Yeah.
So eventually you get to things like, the town is a lie. There's an apocalyptic donkey and smells like cows. There's an octopus with lips. We're going up a long, long way in a Templar castle. Drop a rock at the cross. There's druids on the mountain. Free food feast and tapas and Leon. And anyway, so
did
every
the dancing chicken make the song?
I think it did. Hold on, let me find that. It had to have. Fountain full of wine, a million shades of green, a vineyard in the valley, graffiti on the wall, 100 miles.
Oh, man.
And a cannon goes boom and a bust of Colorado. Oh, no, the cannon goes boom. That's the one. Okay, so that was the city where the chicken was. We hiked all day, got to this city, and we're exhausted. I think it was, hold on, let me see what the name of the city was. It is, we were exhausted, so we get to the albergue, and we laid down, and it turned out that they were having a big festival. It was in Azopra? No. Santo Domingo. It turned out that they were having this festival for the chicken. And the way that the festival started...
I'm all in with a chicken festival, by the way.
Yeah. The way that it started is they were firing off like legitimate cannons. There were no cannonballs in it, but it was gunpowder, and it sounded as loud as a cannon was. And because we were staying right in the heart of the town in this historic albergue, and like everything was right outside our window, the cannons were right outside the window, and we're trying desperately to take a nap. And every 13 seconds or so, there's a cannon blast.
Pete's transported back to the Battle of Franklin all of a sudden.
For real, man. I was so done. With that cannon. And it went on way longer than it should have.
Oh, gosh. Man.
Eventually, we gave up and went outside and enjoyed the festivities. And anyway, that was our time in Santo Domingo.
I love it. I think
so. How's that?
That's awesome. That's perfect. Pete,
Yeah, man.
we really appreciate your time, man. The last question we like to ask is, what's your next adventure? Do you have anything coming up, like the Camino, or something creative you're putting out into the world, or anything that this is? What's your
Yeah,
next adventure right here?
good question. My wife is on her adventure right now. She's in London doing research on a book, and I'm kind of jealous. She's been there for 2 weeks, and she's got 2 more weeks on her own in London. I will say a couple of things. Like I'm working on a new theater production, which hopefully will open this holiday season. Can't announce that yet, but I'm excited about it.
Oh man, that'd be
Of course,
great.
The Hiding Place, I'm excited about. That will
Yeah.
be out this fall. Um, and then we are really itching to get back to the Appalachian Trail at some point.
Cool.
Like we
Awesome.
started down in Georgia at the beginning of it at Springer Mountain
Mhm.
and did the first 40, 50 miles. And then we've done a couple other little sections of it. But, we would like to eventually do the whole thing, only I don't have it in me at 51 to through hike the whole thing.
Yeah.
So doing it in 40, 50-mile chunks sounds much more doable
Yeah.
to me.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah. But I
Agreed.
love it. It's just hiking is in my blood, and I just love getting away from everything I'm walking. And to be honest, like we have talked several times about, we might just pick up and go do the Camino again.
Mm.
I didn't say this earlier, but here is the chief difference between the hiking like you do on the Appalachian Trail, which is out in the middle of nowhere, and the Camino. The Camino is like walking from one coffee shop to another for 500 miles. Like you can always look forward to, like, no matter where you are, you know that in the next hour or two, you're going to go through some little village and they're going to have amazing espresso and something delicious to eat. And you can sit there on the porch, enjoy it. And then you get back up and you walk longer. And it is not hard to go 500 miles that way.
That's amazing.
Man.
Yeah.
Pete, what are some of the ways people can support your writing and support the work that you're doing?
I would just say, like, all my writing flows through the Rabbit Room at some point, whether it's theater, the Rabbit Room theater program, or the books that I write, the short stories that I write, the books that I edit and publish, it all flows through the Rabbit Room. So like, we're grateful for any support that the Rabbit Room can get. Just if anybody's never heard of the Rabbit Room, like it's a nonprofit organization. Our mission is that we cultivate and curate stories, music, and art to nourish Christ-centered communities for the life of the world. And what we mean by that is that, in short, we really believe that the creative arts are powerful nourishment for the church, and that the more well-fed the church is on that, the better it is for the world. Yeah,
it is so putting so much good into the world, and all the stories that you all share and write and produce. I mean, I think it is a true treasure for the capital C Church.
Well, thank you. I said before that it's hard to see it sometimes because we're on the inside of it and we're just kind of exhausted and wondering if any of it works. So it's always good to hear from people on the outside that appreciate what's going on. Thank you.
Yeah, part of our story, Pete, is Brian and I were there in 2019 was the first time that we'd come, and then we were able to go back. But that first time we're together, we'd kept up with each other over the phone for years. We just lived in different cities. And that was first real time we'd really, really hung out a lot, and we fished together some here and there. But it was on that trip that sort of our creative juices were sort of rekindled for both of us. And really one of the puzzle pieces and sparks for this conversation, for the podcast that we have, that we're doing, that you're taking part of. So it's sort of full circle to have you a part of that, and how the Rabbit Room's played a big part in that. We've had lots of people from James Whitmer has been a part of our conversation. SD Smith's going to be on this season with the podcast. Andrew came on when we talked to Andrew. Right. He's okay. We talked about the God of the Garden on there, and so we've had several different Rabbit Room friends be a part of this conversation. So we're just trying to do our best to add and spread the word about the Rabbit Room and Hutchmood and how much it's meant to us. And
well, thank you. That makes me super excited. One of the things that sorry if I'm going over, but for a long time there was this sense that we would do things at the Rabbit Room and people would be like, "Oh, I want to be part of the Rabbit Room. How do we come to guard that?" And that's good and fine. I'm glad that people think that, but our real goal was not that we want everybody to join the Rabbit Room. our goal is that we want people to do good work where they are in their own way.
Yeah.
And I feel like you guys are a perfect example of that. Like, you don't need our approval. You don't need to come and do it in our house. You know, your house is a good one too. So make it beautiful in all the ways that you feel called to.
That's exactly our heart, man. Yeah. So
thank you for that encouragement.
You've inspired us. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, that's also encouraging for me to hear.
Just a small little thing. So when you said that sort of mission statement, was that influenced by Alexander Schmemann, by the way?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Okay. I was just, well, for the life of the world there. I was like, what a great essay.
Yeah. Yeah. I like his whole idea of the sacramental world is my entire worldview. And the Camino is a perfect example of that.
Yeah.
Like the Camino itself is a physical and outward expression of inward and spiritual grace.
That's so good. Well, Pete, thanks for taking time to join us, man. This has been such a great conversation. We're so thankful for the people that do listen and that have engaged in this conversation with us and been on this journey with us. If you've enjoyed this conversation, please take some time to share it with a friend, maybe someone who's interested in pilgrimage or going on the Camino, and they're building up their research about their trip to the Camino. Maybe this will be beneficial to them. It would bless us so much if you took time to leave us a review or a rating on iTunes. That just helps us get the word out for the podcast. But above all things, we hope these stories encourage people. They challenge people to write their own stories and share their adventures in the place that we love to call the storied outdoors.
If you've enjoyed this podcast, please take some time to leave us a review. Or better yet, share it with a friend. We hope these stories encourage you to write your own stories and share your own adventures in the storied outdoors.